Afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the Technology Learning Collaborative webinar on Philadelphia's digital equity strategy. My name is Kate Rivera, and I'm a consultant with the Technology Learning Collaborative, or TLC. And I'll just start by sharing a little bit with you about the organization. So TLC is a professional development organization dedicated to digital literacy providers and advocates. Our mission is to drive the digital literacy, access, and inclusion conversation in Philadelphia by promoting professional collaboration, training, and networking among organizations and institutions that have a dedicated interest in moving these areas forward. In just a minute, I will share our website in the Slack, so that if you're not a member, you're welcome to join us. We have it's completely free to be a member. We have an email list. We have a new Slack community that we just launched. And I'll also share our social media links as well, so you know how to stay connected if you're not connected already. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. The webinar is being recorded, and this will be posted on the TLC YouTube channel. We will send a follow-up email to everyone who registered for the webinar afterwards with the PowerPoint presentation from today, as well as the link to the recording, so that you can rewatch it or share with others who may have missed the webinar. If you have any questions or comments during the presentation today, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll have a little bit of time at the end for discussion. And so today we will be hearing from Juliet Fink Yates, the Digital Inclusion Manager for the City of Philadelphia, who will be giving us an overview of the city's new digital equity plan. But first, I'd like to welcome, we have guests with us today from Next Century City. So I'd like to give them a few minutes to introduce themselves and talk about the work that they're doing.
Hi, everyone. I'm Corianne Zacher, Senior Policy Counsel at Next Century Cities, and we're so glad that we get to be here today. We meet with local officials and community leaders across the country, but we're super excited to hear more about people in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. So we'd love to connect with you offline after this event, and the whole Next Century Cities team is here, so I'll give them a moment to introduce themselves and talk about some ways we can be supportive. But we're always happy to be a resource or help elevate stories that you have that you'd like to share to the national audience. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Executive Director, Francella, for a brief introduction.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you, Corianne, for being the lead on this. My name is Francella. I am, as Corianne mentioned, ED, and I'm really excited just to not only be a part of the team, but to really be able to hear stories from local officials. We show up in lots of cities around the country, over 40 states, and really dig in on a handful of states that have a lot happening, and Pennsylvania is one of them that's a priority for us. So to the extent that we can support, whether it's policy work that you're doing, digital inclusion work, and also research, which is often the beginning of a local official or local government's journey, please do let us know how we can be supportive and also how we can amplify your stories. So I will turn it over to my teammate, Ryan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Johnston. I'm the Policy Counsel for Federal Programs here at Next Century Cities, and I'm also a Pennsylvania native, so I'm always happy to be working on things related to my home state. So mainly what I work on is ensuring how we can take the challenges and issues and experiences that all of our local community members are facing on the ground and really elevating that to the federal level to ensure that federal policymakers understand exactly what the impacts of the policy that they're creating on a daily basis has for the communities that they serve. And at the same time, what we try to also do is take a lot of that policy that's made at the federal level and break that down in ways that people that aren't familiar with working on these things on a daily basis would be able to understand. So breaking down the eligibility requirements for a new FCC funding program and things like that. So with that, I will turn it over to Brittany Ray.
Thanks, Ryan. Hi, I'm Brittany Ray Gregory, and I'm the Communications Director at Next Century Cities. And a big part of my role is elevating the stories of local leaders and also residents. And so I encourage you, like Francella said, please do feel free to connect with us. We have some publications that come out monthly. And then also we have our social media channels. And I want to make sure that whatever your stories are, it's a big part of advancing the work that we do. And please feel free to contact me. I'll put my email in the chat for you. Oh, Corian's already done it. And then I'm going to pass it along to Brian Donahue, our Deputy Director.
Great. I think I might have misspoken and Brian didn't make it on the call in time, but we'll pass it back over to Kate to continue with the meeting. Thank you all so much for letting us join and listen to you today.
Thanks so much for joining us and for all the work that you do. And so with that, I will turn things over to Juliet, who will be sharing with us an overview of the city's digital equity plan.
Can I go ahead and share my screen, Kate? Is that
yes?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. I can't say enough about the Next Century Cities folks. I think they're all phenomenal, and the TLC network. So I encourage you all to, to engage with Next Century Cities if you are able to. And I will also say that as I do my presentation, that this is a conversation. Drop your comments in the chat, particularly Next Century Cities, is collecting them, wants to hear from you guys. So if things come up or you want to share, as I'm speaking, what you really want in Philadelphia, if it's not in the plan, or if you need it to get more specific, put it out here. We're very open to everybody's feedback. I'm also going to be really mindful of time. I have a lot of there's a lot in the plan, so I'm going to try to go through with it as fast as I can. But again, put your questions in the chat and we will get to them as we move forward. So I want to do a little bit of level setting before we get into the plan to talk about what we mean by digital equity, which is really the condition in which all individuals and communities have the information capacity needed for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. I think we know that this is this goes beyond activities for digital inclusion. This is ensuring that that the system provides for everybody. And so what our plan is attempting to do is take a look at the system in Philadelphia and see where we can transform it or update it or think about it in new ways to reach the state of digital equity in Philadelphia. I presented a few months back when we released our data set for, so we did an internet household assessment back in this past July. So this is really updated data in Philadelphia that we were able to get. And it was very important that we did this as part of our process for our digital equity plan so that we could really understand what the story in Philadelphia actually looked like. The data that everybody has, if it's coming from the American Community Survey, which is really the most recent publicly available data, is pretty old. It's from 2019, pre-pandemic, and things have shifted very, very rapidly since the pandemic because, shockingly, everybody now knows that internet access to devices, access to skills is really, really critical. So the story in Philadelphia, as it stands from this past July, looks a little bit more promising with a lot more work that we still need to do. So broadband adoption in Philadelphia is higher than 2 years ago. Our discount offers really do make a difference. And this is especially true for our K-12 and low income households, particularly where those discount offers are targeted. But even with those discount programs, 1/3 of Philadelphia broadband households are considered subscription vulnerable. So these are folks who either experienced service interruption during the pandemic, they say it would be difficult to keep service without a discount, or they themselves are low income. And so any amount of cost for their internet is gonna create a vulnerability. What's really interesting about this concept is that it recognizes that people go in and out of service, that they can have it at times, but then they can also lose it. And so not having consistent access is one of the challenges that we have in Philadelphia and in many places across the country. Really, there's a huge lack of public awareness about what discount programs are available, including things like the Affordable Connectivity Program that's now offered by the FCC. And so that is a big component of what we hope to address through the plan. Not terribly surprising, those who are not online in Philadelphia are older and they have lower incomes. And there are some additional nuances that I'll get into in my next slide. And affordability remains the chief barrier in Philadelphia. So either the cost of the monthly fee for internet service or the cost of a computer puts this out of range for Philadelphians. There are other barriers, but affordability consistently tops those barriers. This is the data that came out of that assessment. So I just want to draw your attention to a few data points. So about 88% of Philadelphia households have a smartphone. 81% of households have a desktop, laptop, or tablet, but that really shifts when you start looking at populations. So it drops dramatically when you look at low-income households, seniors, and Spanish-speaking Hispanic households as well. And so you can see some real disparities in certain communities in Philadelphia when it comes to device ownership. Those are also mimicked in home broadband connectivity. So when we talk about home broadband connectivity, we're talking wired home access. 84% of Philadelphia households have a wireline broadband connection, which is an increase from 70% in 2019. So that's a pretty large jump, and that's promising. And that jump is even greater in our K-12 households. And that should not be surprising because so much emphasis over the past 2 years during this pandemic was to get our K-12 households connected because of remote learning. There still remains about 12,000 who lack wireline broadband in our K-12 households. So that's something that we're working on right now. But again, you start seeing the disparities when you look at some of the other populations. So 82% of Black, 77% of Hispanic, and only 67% of Spanish-speaking Hispanic households have a wireline connection. 67% of older Philadelphians have a wireline connection. And then again, 71% of households with annual incomes less than 20K have broadband. Here again, this is a reminder that subscription vulnerability is really important. 30% of our current non-broadband subscribers actually had it before. So these are not people who need to understand the value of it. They've adopted it, but they can no longer afford it. And so they don't have it anymore. The other thing that's really interesting here is that without the discount programs like PHL Connected or Comcast Internet Essentials and other programs like it, broadband adoption would likely be about 75%, not 84%. So those do make a big impact. 9 percentage point increase in general for Philadelphia households and a 17% point increase in adoption for low income households. And lastly, 75% of our low-income Philadelphians say that spending more than $21 per month is going to be too expensive. And so that kind of sets the stage for where we took some of our plan from, what informed our plan. So some of the challenges and barriers that we identified through talking with many folks throughout this process is, again, affordability. We talked a little bit about that already. So speed, in Philadelphia, we have a couple options that have very high speed access. The FCC defines broadband at 25.3 megabits per second. So 25 megabits per second down and 3 megabits per second up. But we know now from going through this pandemic, it's really insufficient for today's household needs. All of Philadelphia's wired solutions can exceed this minimum, but we have recommended in Philadelphia that we want to move all ISPs to minimum standard of 100 megabits per second down and 20 megabits per second up. And some of the reasoning for this is what the NTIA has proposed for any new broadband infrastructure funds. And so we are following that guidance. There still remains some limited internet options. So there's limited wired ISP consumer options in Philadelphia, and only one costs under $20 a month. And so we know we need more options to increase, we need more options for folks. Housing vulnerability remains really a challenge, largely because wired isn't going to provide the connectivity that these families and households need. So we need to think about fast Wi-Fi access across neighborhoods outside of Center City. We know we also have a prohibition, for those who don't know this, who are in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has a prohibition on municipal networks. So the city of Philadelphia cannot create its own municipal network. But we could leverage some of our assets to create public-private partnerships and enable, for example, neighborhood wireless networks for home access. So that's an area that we've been exploring. And that we've heard a lot about the intersecting barriers or needs. So many community members face multiple challenges that include limited English proficiency, physical or intellectual disabilities, limited literacy skills, among other challenges that really make it more complicated to sign up and get the services that they need. And they need a lot of support to do that. Which goes to our next point, and this was a really important point. Many of you have said this already, so this should not come as a surprise to you, but those with limited digital access and skills really need human touch points. They really need to talk to somebody or sit with somebody to help them get online. And that we need to be thinking about not just our online forums, but human high-touch networks to support our communities. So a little bit about our planning process. This is a little bit about just a brief kind of overview of how we designed this process. So very quickly on, we realized in the city that we needed to pull together a wide variety of city departments so that to exchange information. We needed to hear from departments across the city about what their needs were, but we also needed to talk to them about what was happening, because there was not a lot of information sharing happening at the city level. So we pulled together something that we called the Digital Equity Coordinating Committee, which was made up of internal city agencies like the Streets Department, Parks and Rec, the libraries, Office of Children and Families, the Policy Office, et cetera. And we had a group meeting around from the city, and we met monthly. We also had our Digital Literacy Alliance, which is our standing group made up of external community members. So this includes our major ISP partners, so Comcast, Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T participate in our Digital Literacy Alliance, as well as many of our really essential CBO partners, including TLC sits on it. So groups like, nonprofit groups from around the city, educational institutions, and other, Philadelphia Works, our workforce board, for example, sits on the Digital Literacy Alliance. We then broke up into 4 work streams focused on access and support for K-12 families, public computing centers, digital literacy and workforce, citywide infrastructure and access for all, and then policy advocacy and long-term funding. And at the same time, we were convening a digital health equity task force made up of partners from the healthcare sector to get information and feedback from them. We asked members of both of these larger committees, Digital Equity Coordinating Committee and the Digital Literacy Alliance, to join one or more of these work streams. And then we pulled in other folks to join these work streams as well. So for example, in the work stream number 1, access and support for K-12 families, we reached out to the district and charter and independent mission schools that we worked with and invited them into those meetings. So depending on what the work stream was, we had folks come in and talk about what their needs were. And we had someone in OIT lead a design thinking session for each of these work streams to really solicit wide range of ideas that we could bring to the table and start exploring. And then, as I said, we did our household internet assessment resident survey. And then the last thing that we did was, there is another group in the city of Philadelphia. The city of Philadelphia is very large. So not surprisingly, sometimes there are multiple efforts happening in other departments. So in our community engagement team, they are building an equitable community engagement toolkit. The idea behind this toolkit is for city departments to think about how we can do a better job of engaging with residents. And one of their key areas that they were exploring is how the city can do a better job in terms of engaging with residents who may lack digital access. And so they held a series of in-person resident focus groups as well to inform our process. All right, so now I'm going to actually get into this plan and talk a little bit about what we put in here. Again, I'm going to go through it. You can continue to put questions in the chat, but I'm going to try to get through this pretty quickly. So we outlined in the end, although we had these different work streams going on, we kind of merged everything together and really landed on these 4 key goals. The first was around devices, that Philadelphians can access appropriate and affordable technology devices. The second was around connectivity, that Philadelphians can access and afford the internet connectivity they need. The third was around training and workforce, that Philadelphians develop the digital skills necessary for work and life. And 4 was around our ecosystem, that Philadelphia grows and sustains the infrastructure and ecosystem to increase digital equity. So I'm going to get into each one of these in more detail with you all. So you can read all of this in our plan. It's a fairly long document, I will say, but all of this comes directly from that plan. There is more information about each of our strategies and initiatives if you want to read about them in more detail, but I will try to cover what I can here. So under devices, we had 3 key strategies. The first was really trying to push and increase bulk purchasing and grants for devices. We know that access to a large screen device, so a laptop, a desktop, or a tablet, has become more and more critical. And so one of the best mechanisms we saw during the pandemic was using the bulk purchasing power of large institutions to get very good prices on devices and be able to distribute them quickly. We want to ensure that our local education agencies, so short term for that is LEAs, so you might hear me use that term moving forward, can maintain a 1-to-1 device ratio for K-12 students. The district has already committed to this, which is really exciting, but we know that for some charter schools and some other schools, that's not as easy. And so from the city's perspective, we're really interested in helping these schools leverage possible funding to continue maintaining a 1-to-1 device ratio. We also know that, and we heard this across the spectrum, that our adult learners in adult literacy, ESL, digital literacy, workforce classes continue to struggle to get access to devices in order to take those classes. And so we really wanted to prioritize those learners in distributing devices and getting them access to devices. And then the third one here is around leveraging, again, these big institutions to do bulk purchases, not of 20, 50 computers, but of 5,000, 10,000 or more devices to be able to distribute. And there has been some success there. Our free library was able to apply for what's called the Emergency Connectivity Fund, and they were able to leverage and purchase bulk devices. So programs like that we know make a huge impact, and we want to be able to work with entities to consider that ability for bulk purchasing. The next one is that we heard over and over again how important our network of public computing centers was, and as these digital inclusion hubs. And so we know that they were valuable. We wanted to reinforce their supports. And so part of the work that the city wants to do is to expand its high quality public computer center network, specifically to priority neighborhoods and for multilingual populations. And so this looks like right now we're about to reopen our Key Spot Innovation and Technology Centers in 8 recreation centers. They've been given more resources and more support, more hours. And so we're looking sort of at this new model of a public computing center to really expand on. The other thing we really were interested in is establishing and sustaining innovative device access programs. So there's a lot of interesting ideas pop up pop-up device gardens and all sorts of cool things that people are doing. And so in order for these programs to continue, we know that they need more support. And lastly, this is probably the number one biggest thing we heard throughout multiple reports and from everyone, is that we really need to scale a system of computer recycling, refurbishing, and community tech support in the city. And so we really, we kind of started with PHL Donate Tech, but we think that there's an opportunity to really scale that up and establish a non-city entity to take on that work and manage a large-scale citywide project. Keep moving forward. So connectivity, you know, around connectivity, we thought about kind of three main strategies. One was really continuing to support internet subsidies for those who could not afford internet. The second one was to help facilitate sustainable community-based networks to increase public Wi-Fi and freer low-cost broadband. And the third one was to continue to increase high-quality, low-cost options through our ISP and wireless providers. So under the first one, we're very committed to maintaining PHL Connected's free options for our K-12, pre-K through 12 students. We are also really interested in continuing to look at how we can dedicate funding and support for mobile hotspot lending programs. And we are in constant discussions with how we can create a long-term sustainable fund to continue broadband subsidies for residents in need. So this is something that we are continuing to explore as a city, how we can bring in revenue to continue to support those programs. When we talk about community-based networks, we're very interested in one of the biggest holes in the city system is our recreation centers. We have 150 recreation centers in every single neighborhood of the city, and they don't have high capacity fiber and Wi-Fi throughout them. And this is the last area of the city facilities that don't have that kind of networking capability. It's a big hole, we think, in our system. And so we're very interested in enabling every recreation center to serve as these sort of digital anchor institutions in every neighborhood. We're also, though, very interested in thinking about our assets, our building assets, our poles, for increasing community-led wireless networks. So there's a couple of community-led wireless network efforts happening, and we're really excited to watch those efforts and see where they go and figure out how we can support them moving forward. And then, you know, we will continue to work with our telecom and ISP partners to really elevate digital equity solutions and things like our franchise agreements and other contracting opportunities. Many of them have stepped up to the plate. Many of them have been able to offer more options. And so we continue to feel like these are relationships that we want to build and cultivate and continue to provide best services for Philadelphians. There's a lot on this slide, and I'm just looking, okay, I have we're almost to the end. So I will try to get through this one. Training and workforce. So our main strategies here are to really provide community-based digital navigation services across the city. So we have a small program that is running right now. It's been incredibly powerful at how good those digital navigators have been at signing folks up for internet, getting them devices, and helping them with a whole host of their digital support needs. But we think that that was a pilot program. And so we are really interested in continuing to sustainably fund and expand this network. We are interested in making it an accredited training module. So for those who are in the workforce system, there would be a training that you could get ideally down the road, and that would translate to a credit, like a college credit that could be used and establish your ability to say you have this training and that you are a certified, for example, digital navigator with a certain set of skills. I think that's where we want to see this going in the future. And I think it will, by doing that, it can help foster programs across the city, including in our health centers, which is one of our, which is the thing we heard the most in our digital health task force, digital health equity task force, is this idea that digital navigation skills can be built into a variety of healthcare roles. And they are really excited about that concept. We also heard from our schools that parents, caregivers need a ton of support on their digital skills. The schools themselves have a lot of online tools. They have parent portals. They have to look up their grades. They're getting emails from the school. And a lot of our households and our caregivers don't have the skills needed and need more support to help their students and families. And so this was an area that we really wanted to call out for support. And we just through PHL Connected devoted some grant resources to that, which you'll be hearing about more in the coming weeks. The other thing that we really talked about internally and externally with all of our partners is building this coordinated system of digital literacy providers with clear pathways into adult education and workforce programs. So one of the things about the Philadelphia landscape is we have a lot of wonderful nonprofits and community-based organizations providing digital literacy courses already. We probably have over 50 who have at some point in the past couple of years provided digital literacy courses and digital literacy programs. But they often work in silos, and we've had no real way to measure progress or use a shared curriculum or guidance. So the digital literacy system, unlike the adult literacy system, which is, there's an assessment tool that everybody uses, there's metrics that are reported on, it's very much free flowing, and every organization has done what they can with very little resources. And so the idea here is to really be able to provide multi-year funding for CBOs to really offer these gateway digital literacy courses and then pathways into more advanced courses through our workforce system. We also really want to align our digital literacy programs with the tech skills needed in the workplace. So thinking about what is being taught from the elementary school all through post-secondary education, and how does it align to the competencies needed in the workforce today. This is something that we hear a lot from our Commerce Department, from Chamber, from many people working in the workforce field. And so this is something that we're interested in unpacking with them more. And then the Digital Literacy Alliance itself has been able to really seed innovative digital inclusion activities. And so we want to continue to be able to do that over the years. I've already talked a little bit about digital literacy assessments and how the system isn't quite, it's not robust yet. And so what we have done as a city is that we are starting to adopt this North Star assessment standard across Philadelphia's community. So North Star is a digital literacy assessment tool, and it provides a lot of great resources to help folks see where they are and what skills are still needed. We are beginning to provide that. The Office of Children and Families Adult Education is able to provide free accounts to North Star. And so we are starting to seed this in Philadelphia and really be able to have sort of a unified system. And then the other thing that came up is that there's just no public place where we can find a digital literacy course near you. There's no website. And partially the reason is because there hasn't been resources devoted to maintaining that. And the other reason this is because during the pandemic, so many programs simply were not able to run their classes. And so it was very hard to figure out what was happening and what was going on. But this is something, creating this public website of digital literacy courses and a citywide database for internal CBO referrals to courses is something that we're very, very interested in moving forward on. And then the last one here is really thinking about and being really mindful that whatever we create, whatever we're doing, we need to be mindful of our multilingual residents, because we know that this is a huge those who don't speak English, there's a huge barrier and a need for programs. And so we really want to make sure that we're providing multilingual digital navigation and increasing our access to multilingual digital literacy content. So for example, North Star, we're funding them to put it into Spanish to create the whole system in Spanish. And from there, once they have that base in Spanish, they'll be able to create it in multiple languages beyond that. And so we're trying to establish a way to create a system that can accommodate multiple languages for learning. We also want to make sure that whenever we do digital inclusion programs, that outreach and materials are offered in multiple languages, because we know that this is a real challenge in awareness of available programs. So our last goal was ecosystem. The idea behind ecosystem is to build out our system so that beyond administrations, we can continue this work. And that it's not dependent on one particular mayor or one set of council members' prerogatives. So we do need to internally build our capacity at municipal government to advance digital equity. I think this is the start of that, creating this plan and having somebody like me kind of manage it and watch it and help seed it. But we also know that the city needs to manage a pretty comprehensive portfolio of digital equity programs that we can count on a sustainable funding source beyond administrations. The city has taken a lead since the pandemic in really advocating at the state and local levels on behalf of digital equity for municipalities. This wasn't always the case, but with federal funding coming down the pipe, we've been able to submit comments to the FCC, to the NTIA. We've joined with other cities to submit comments. We've been working very hard with our state entities on what Philadelphia's needs are. And so we think there's an important role for the city to play here in advocacy. And that we need to actually create, this is mentioned multiple times, a revenue generating stream for the portfolio of programs that we want to run. Again, we're looking at a couple options here. We're looking at how to use our assets. We're looking at some really interesting things around stuff like city coins. And so we are exploring a number of ways to create that revenue stream. Data collection is really important in this work. We've started it with our internet household assessment, but we are going to need to continue to do that yearly. And so we want to continue to collect an annual household internet and device survey, but we also need to collect infrastructure data and develop tools that we can use to improve digital equity. So this might look like an open source available map of all of our city facilities that partners might be able to request that they want to use certain rooftops, and then we would be able to have permitting for those more easily. We don't have that system in place right now. We're very much interested in thinking about how we create and develop the tools to do that. We also heard, this was echoed in previous reports, and I will mention that Kate helped on a report for the public computing centers about 2 years ago, that we really need to support non-city entities to also advance digital equity. So what the situation in Philadelphia looks like is that we have a lot of amazing community-based organizations who are focused on housing, or who are focused on healthcare, or who are focused on education, but who are not, there isn't one natural entity focused solely on digital inclusion. And I will say that with a caveat, which is that TLC, now that they're incorporated, may be able to claim that they are the only one really focused on this work. So we know that we really need to build up these independent entities from the city, because there are ways that they can advocate that the city can't, and they can do it in ways that are really incredibly valuable. And so we're very interested in looking into identifying and funding independent entities that could focus on coalition building, program coordination, and state and federal advocacy. And then we've also mentioned previously, the need we think of an independent entity to coordinate and manage a large scale citywide recycling, refurbishing, and community tech support operation that could take over kind of our fledgling PHL Donate Tech program. And the last goal, or the last strategy and initiatives, is around establishing and promoting best practices for software applications and tools. So this is a really big one rolled into one tiny strategy. But really what this is about is that we are all using online systems now, and those systems are not built by us, by the community, or they are not built with input for the community. They don't have other mechanisms necessarily for the community. So if you don't have access, you are locked out of that online system, right? And so we've seen this with vaccine access. We've seen this or testing sites. When everything goes online and not everybody is online, there are going to be people left out. And when everything goes online and if it's not ADA accessible, if it's not in multiple languages, it's going to be inaccessible. So when we think about our systems, we really need to do some work here to improve them and to make sure that there are analog options, to make sure that they can, that we always have best practices in place for the departments who are moving to web-based forms or applications. And then the health sector in particular really focused on this one because of their use of patient portals and EMR systems and how complex and complicated those systems are. So this is an area that we wanted to build in to support them in really shifting that dynamic so that residents could actually have systems that work for them. This is my last slide. This is sort of where we are. So that was the grand plan. It's a plan in a 5-year plan. It is a plan that we see as in progress. So we anticipate things changing from year to year based on what funding is available and how things sort of how the landscape shifts. So we think of it as a living document with feedback. But some of our major priorities that we would love to move on over the next, in the more near future, I should say, are really these initiatives. So really bolstering PHL Connected to continue to provide free internet to our pre-K through 12 sector, supporting our digital navigators, building out these kit centers and expanding them over time, that we are able to distribute devices with community tech support. Really bolstering our digital literacy providers to offer a suite of digital literacy training and programs. Very interested in moving on providing high capacity fiber to our recreation centers and with Wi-Fi to the surrounding campuses. And very interested in supporting or facilitating these low-cost community-led wireless networks. We will need to continue to engage with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The vast majority of federal funds for these initiatives will go through the state. And so working with you all on these programs will be crucial as we think about state need, how Philadelphia can apply for and access that funding. And then the lastly is this plan is not to suggest that the city is going to be able to do all of these things, that we know that the city is will take on pieces of it, but we are going to need public-private partnerships to move on some of this. That includes major anchor institutions, health centers, hospitals, as well as our ISP partners. So everybody should be engaging in digital equity work because it can't happen. It's to everybody's advantage if we are all putting in resources to contributing to ending the digital divide. And that is the plan. So I'll stop. I totally did that in a half an hour, Kate.
It was perfect. You're exactly on time, Juliet. thank you so much for sharing all of that with us, and for all of your work on this plan and the initiatives that you've been working on. Now is the time, everyone, for you to ask any questions you may have, either of Juliet, or we also have the folks from Next Century Cities still on the webinar as well. So if you have questions, or if you have thoughts, ideas, priorities that you'd like to share, that you can, want to make sure that they're being considered both locally and at the national level. Now is your chance. You can jot things down in the chat, or if you're going to use the raise hand function and speak verbally, that would be great as well. I do see a raised hand there for Next Century Cities.
I'm not sure if other people have their hands raised, so that's why I was just waiting a moment. But if I could just ask a question, Juliet, because one of the things that I feel like comes up very frequently when we're talking to community leaders is, at what point do you decide to essentially make that something that you're only doing with nonprofits or other public interest groups? And at one point did you decide, okay, this is a piece that we might do in collaboration with a private partner?
That's a great question. I think that it depends on what it is and what sort of city process it needs to go through. So, for example, the Digital Literacy Alliance, can put out a grant round, and we largely fund community-based organizations to do that work. So that would be, we might say we're going to do a grant round on a particular area. And we're looking, we might say we're looking for local, 501c3 organizations. In other scenarios, we might need the expertise of a private partner, possibly. We might have, the city might have an interest in, and I'll just talk about the rec center project, providing fiber to the rec centers and wireless. So that would have to go through a city RFP process, and nonprofit and other private companies would be able to apply for that. So it kind of depends on the scale of the project and the type of project that it is. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
We do have a question in the chat. For the low-cost internet options, would the city be willing to be the customer of record instead of the consumer directly?
Can you unpack that for me? What do you, Jacqueline?
Sure. Yeah, and so basically, I know that we run into sometimes credit challenges by trying to have it be specific to the resident. So I'm curious if the city would be willing to be the customer on record and then distribute devices or low-cost internet options to their residents.
Yeah, so I think some examples of that are, I think, it's not exactly what you're talking about, but I think that it kind of comes close. So with PHL Connected, the city entered into contract agreements with Comcast for Internet Essentials and with T-Mobile for hotspots. So we the city's the customer of, in a sense. For Comcast, for a residential household, they still need to be the house, it's really tied to an address. So the household has to be that customer. But because we have the hotspot option, the city can continue to distribute that where that is not possible for those households. Similarly, when the Free Library created its hotspot lending program, they're able to bulk purchase hotspots and pay for that service for residents, and they can distribute them. So it's unrelated to where they live. Does that?
Gotcha.
But I don't know that the city would say, because the problem with so much of this is that home wired access is tied to an address. So I think that's where the hotspot option becomes really important.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And I see a raised hand from Toby, who I have to give you a little shout out. Toby was just named the Benton Digital Equity Champion for 2022 by the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. So a local Philly digital inclusion practitioner being recognized on the national stage. And Toby, you have a question or comment?
Thank you. Thank you. Juliet, very often we've heard that people masquerade some of their defensiveness or worries about even trying digital by saying it's too costly, which some of your data proves out. Will there be a media partner? Will there be another a real push to make the population understand how simple and how many places this is going? And I'm talking maybe sometimes lower income individuals.
Yeah. So we don't have plans right at this moment for a major media campaign, although having just heard about what LA did, it is like on my radar, and I'm really, really interested in doing a large scale campaign. I think that there is opportunities for a large scale campaign with some of the federal funding. So I do have that on my radar. I think there's opportunities that can be woven into the multilingual aspect of the plan too, because that's a really, really crucial piece of a marketing campaign. What I will say that the city is doing is that we have this community resource corps made up of AmeriCorps members, and their goal is to do canvassing and door knocking on a whole variety of benefits that Philadelphians could access. And so we've started them with PHL Connected, but I think there's an opportunity there to leverage this other city program to increase awareness and access to digital equity. So one of the things, and this is why bringing different departments together in the city is so important, is that we know what we're each doing so that we can actually leverage what's happening in other departments in the city, for example.
Thanks. Julia, it seems like you still somewhat have your screen share on, or we don't see, there's like a blank.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yep.
Yeah, no
Sorry about
problem.
that.
There we go. Thank you. There is a
why the
question which
municipal prohibition? So I think there's a number, so from my understanding, and this is again, my particular understanding of the issue, the city tried almost 15 years ago to create a citywide system called Philadelphia Wireless, right? Wireless Philadelphia, that was what it's called. Sorry, I was getting confused between the Philly Community Wireless folks. And it was kind of one of the very first national efforts to create this network. It didn't succeed for a number of reasons. But one of the things that happened after it was created was an attempt to not to, where there was already industry, to not have industry have to compete with government. And so several states, not just Pennsylvania, created these prohibitions on municipal networks where there was already an industry partner willing to provide some amount of service. So there are places in Pennsylvania that actually could potentially have a municipal network, but Philadelphia is not one of them because we are currently served by one or more providers. And how would you advocate for it if you want to change that? That you need to contact your state legislatures and really talk to them, and talk to Francella and the Next Century Cities team. Does that include TV white space? So that includes any ability for the city to own and operate that network for home internet. the city can operate a network for public access use or for city facilities, but for home internet access use is where the prohibition is.
Great, and just a few resources in the chat there. And we do have time for probably just one more question or comment if anyone has anything else. So, quiet group.
Now's the time. Get your ideas out there. What did we miss? What didn't we say in here?
You gave such a comprehensive presentation, Julia.
Well, many of the folks on this call participated in various conversations and gave a lot of feedback. So this really truly was an effort that we really got from our community partners. And so it's thanks to many of you on this call who helped us create it.
Juliet, I had one question I sent you. It's Stephanie Costa. I sent you an email while we were doing this because I don't know why it didn't occur to me to ask this 6 months ago when the report came out. But we talked about the 91% penetration for K through 12, and I think it's 85 in general. You talked about wireline. Does that exclude those with T-Mobile hotspots? Is it only people with broadband to the home?
Yeah, it actually does, because that number is actually statistically wasn't significant to ask as like a metric even to include in it. So yeah, it's just wireline to the home. So
in
there's
theory,
it's probably less than 1% though.
Okay, in theory, it's not 12,000. It could be less than 12,000 people.
Yes.
Issue here. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
I have no idea why all the times we've gone over that number, that has not occurred to me.
Yeah, we actually went back and forth on asking specifically, just so folks know, in our internet survey, we asked, the questions were very much aligned to the census questions because we wanted to be able to demonstrate any changes over time from 2019 to 2021. So we asked the question very similarly. We wanted to put in a question specifically around hotspots because there had been so much distribution of hotspots. But the research, two things happened. One, when we pilot tested the question, people didn't understand that term, even though we explained it in the question. There was not enough people understood what it meant to make the question, I don't know, in research terms, one that made sense to folks, I guess. And then the second reason was that when we looked at how many hotspots actually probably were distributed, it would have been a less than 1% statistical.
Right, for broadly overall, but if you're looking at the K through 12 population, we have thousands of hotspots that were distributed. So if you're talking about a population of not being connected to 12,000, if I don't know what the thing is, but if we distribute 2,500 hotspots, that's a significant hit to that 12,000.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I do think that there are probably that amount, but you know, the research doesn't necessarily bear that out, or they answered it under, because it asks about other subscription, like wireless subscriptions, and people answer it under that. So it's still, there's more to do there to dig for sure. And there's probably things that we could do to think about how to ask to validate that questioning in surveys.
And then the other question I had was that there's no indication for the ACP program in the digital plan, and I was wondering why we haven't thought about using that.
So we mentioned it a lot throughout the plan. You know, things were moving really rapidly. So we were making this plan and there was the EBB and then it shifted to the ACP as we were like drafting it, right? So we definitely mentioned it. And I think it's going to become a really important component of this work, particularly around the awareness and sustainability of internet subsidies. But I will say that it's a 5-year program. And so I think we still fundamentally want to think about, until we know more if it's going to be continued, like what's the fail safe for subsidies, right? Like how can we as a city make sure that we can continue a program if the federal government doesn't continue it? I have good faith that given how many people have signed up, it will. But, we built a plan to try to think about what we would need to do in the to future-proof the system.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, thank you so much. We are at time. Thank you again, Juliet, for sharing this. And thank you for the Next Century Cities folks as well for joining and all the work that you're doing.
I see one more question.
Yes.
Can I?
Yeah.
Marvetta, about older adults, they are such an important population. And I just want to acknowledge that when we tried to, we didn't call out very many specific populations, because once we started doing that, we had like 20 populations that everybody's like, well, you have to call out this, you have to call out that. And so I think that we really struggled with this, like where to specifically name a particular population. And so we have a section in there that kind of identifies kind of high priority populations, seniors being one of them, in terms of we see that as a huge need. And then kind of other groups that folks mentioned as being really important for us to consider as we roll out these plans. And I think that this will be in areas around digital skills and awareness and digital navigation support. I see that's where we can build in these supports for our seniors.
Great. And I did drop a link in the chat to a feedback form if folks could just take a quick minute to let us know what you thought of the webinar, and if you have topic ideas for future ones. This is a monthly webinar series, and we do look at those feedback forms and use them to determine what else to focus on. So please do take a minute to fill that out. I also want to thank Comcast. They are a sponsor for our monthly webinar series. And thank you all so much for your work, and enjoy the rest of your day.